What are some deeply unsettling facts that you know? Story 1. Veteran criminals in the gulags would recruit naive prisoners for their escape attempts called cows, for the sole purpose of eating them when they ran out of food in the Siberian wilderness. Story 2. In the Battle of Verdun, over 1 million artillery shells were fired onto a 19-mile-wide stretch of land in the first 12 hours. If you were lucky enough to survive until then, the sound alone was enough to drive you insane. Of the 800,000 casualties at Verdun, an estimated 70% were caused by artillery. The Germans launched 2 million shells during their opening bombardment, more than any engagement in history to that point, and the two sides eventually fired between 40 and 60 million shells over the next 10 months. That's insane. Story 3. If a hamster manages to get its hands on your body if you're dead, it will use chunks of your skin, hair, and other stuff to make a nest, leaving a very bloody and messy scene behind. Story 4. The Junko Furuta case. Reading about it gave me nightmares. She was held captive for 44 days and basically tortured by classmates. Some parents knew what was going on but did nothing about it. Since the criminals were juveniles at the time, they're free today. For those who haven't read it, I would honestly say that you shouldn't and don't look it up. It will do nothing but make you furious at the least and disgusted. At worst, you won't be able to forget the details. There's enough shit going around. Spare yourself this one time. Story 5. Paradoxical undressing. It happens during the last stages of hypothermia. As your nerves are damaged, the person removes all of their clothing in freezing temperatures because they feel irrationally hot. Story 6. Tumors can grow teeth. They're called teratomas and can even form hair, skin, some cases report eyes, and one that I heard develop brain cells. Really creepy. Story 7. Bananas are berries, but strawberries are not. Okay, that was the smallest post with the most what the factor without relying on something gruesome. Story 8. In 1993, a doctor named Carl Tanzer raided the tomb of a female patient with whom he'd become obsessed and stole her body. He lived with the corpse for 7 years. As the body fell apart, he attached the corpse's bones together with wire and coat hangers and fitted the face with glass eyes. He was only caught when someone saw him dancing with a corpse in front of an open window. Oh my god. Story 9. There are dogs and cats on YouTube that made more money than you and your parents working your whole life. Story 10. The USA has lost 6 nuclear weapons that were never found. I smell the plot of the next Call of Duty campaign. Story 11. The Australian Prime Minister pooped himself at McDonald's. Story 12. From 1928 to 1972, the province would sterilize people who they found to be mentally handicapped. They figured this was the ideal way to stop the spread of mental disease. Story 13. Beagles are the most popular breed of dogs used in testing because they're the most forgiving to humans. Story 14. The Matthews and the Hart bridges in Jacksonville are about to fail. The pilings in the river do not touch the bottom. I'm a commercial diver, and I refuse to drive in these bridges. Story 15. In the 1800s, a lot of dentures were made using the teeth of dead soldiers. Talk about recycling. Story 16. In 2019, there was a document about internet predators. The filmmakers hired 3 young-looking actresses and let them pose as 12-year-old girls on social media for 10 days. They received 2,458 messages. Only one of them actually wanted to chat. The rest were predators. Story 17. The number of people older than you never increases. That's been on my mind a lot, actually. I'm 25 and I'm currently still below the average age of the human population. Most people alive right now are older than me. However, that number is dwindling each day and the number of people younger than me increases each day. Makes me realize how fast my life is flying by. Story 18. Terminal lucidity is the return of mental clarity or memory or consciousness shortly before death. This happens to around 10% of people with dementia. I look after my dad who had Alzheimer's for 3 years. He couldn't remember who I was or anyone else for that matter. He ended having a fall, and when we came to the hospital, we were told he wouldn't survive the night. It took 11 days of palliative care before he passed. Worst experience ever. During this time, he was unconscious, until the day of my birthday when he woke up, opened his eyes, and started speaking very quietly. He motioned me over and said, "Hi, son," and told me he loved me and was proud of me. This was the first time in 3 years that he knew who I was. He then spoke to all the family, his brothers and sisters, mom and my sisters, before spending the day laughing and joking with us all sitting up in bed, like before he had his illness. That night he fell asleep and never woke up again, and passed a few days later. I was told that this was very normal, but it really opened my eyes to think he had been in there all this time, not being able to communicate with us. My dad didn't mention his illness or what it was like living with dementia when he was lucid, but he did tell us a lot of stories about his youth that we hadn't heard before. He seemed to remember his whole life like it was just yesterday for that one special day. My only advice for anyone going through having a loved one with dementia or Alzheimer's is to be patient with them and try to remember they may understand everything that's going on but just can't respond. They still love you the same, even though they act so different. Big love to you all. Story 19. People with dementia just forget how to eat one day. They forget how to swallow. We don't know if they feel starvation or pain because they're too far gone. My brother works in a dementia care facility, and they know that a patient is going to die soon when they eventually refuse food. And we don't euthanize them. They just starve to death. And they never tell the families that. I'm so sorry to those that have lost loved ones to dementia. It's a really cruel and heartless way to die. Story 20. Cows don't convert grass directly into protein. They have enormous colonies of bacteria in their stomachs that are population explosions when they eat grass, live, breed, die, and then the cows digest them into protein. Cows are bacteria ranchers. Cowception. Story 21. Rainbow Valley at Mount Everest is named so because of the colorful coats of dead people. The blue Mustang statue at the Denver airport, named Lucifer by the locals, killed its creator when a piece fell and severed an artery in his leg. If weird ghost stuff is happening, make sure your carbon monoxide detector is working. Story 22. The astonishing fatality rates that can be found in so many battles in the First World War weren't accidents or unfortunate byproducts of the technology. They were factored into the battle plans. By the nature of attrition warfare, it was calculated how many men would be lost every week, and commanders drew up enough reinforcements to replace them. This was called normal wastage. Story 23. They used to not use anesthesia on babies when they would do surgery. Story 24. Mummy Brown is a paint cube partially made up of ground-up Egyptian mummies. There are paintings made of dead people. Also, besides Mummy Brown or Egyptian Brown, we used to eat mummies because of their supposed medical properties. That's why there are so few of them left. Who the fuck is we? Story 25. Once symptoms start, rabies has 100% mortality rate. Fortunately, the incubation period is several months, so get that shot ASAP. I'd like to add that you can also get rabies from scratches, not only bites. Also, small rodents like rats, mice, hamsters, squirrels, and rabbits are not known to transmit rabies to humans. Story 26. YouTubers who find animals in distress with a camera running usually put animals in distress to look like heroes. On a similar note, you're not finding and rescuing an abandoned baby deer. It is the natural behavior of deer to hide their babies in bushes and such while they go feeding somewhere, and regularly come back to nurse them and check on them. You find a lone baby deer, just leave it alone. It doesn't need your attention-seeking human ass. Story 27. Dogs like squeaky toys because it sounds like prey that's frightened or injured. On the bright side, I've heard stories of dogs who immediately drop their squeaky toy after it squeaks and whimper and cuddle with it. Story 28. Years ago, I remember watching an episode of the show Monsters Inside Me, where this 16-year-old kid was doing something outside and a fly flew into his eye. It only made contact for about a microsecond, but it was enough time for it to lay eggs. After they hatched, they started destroying his eye from the inside, and he was starting to go blind, until the doctor finally figured out what was wrong. Just imagine that. Losing your sight all because a fly very briefly made contact with you. Ever since I learned about this, I get really paranoid when there's a fly around my face because of the fact that this could possibly happen to me. Story 29. The USSR built a massive arsenal of nuclear weapons and then dissolved, leaving poorly paid guards behind who no longer had a USSR to hold allegiance to. This made them vulnerable to being bought off by the highest paid bidder. To feed their families, and a whole bunch of those nukes just vanished, and no one knows where they are. Story 30. With the permafrost and tundra thawing out, bacteria and other microorganisms that we know nothing about are becoming active again. Story 31. Cats know when they're going to die. They go and find a small secluded place and pass away. For what it's worth, I've heard that the reason cats seek seclusion to die is not because they understand that death is coming, but because they feel weak and wary and instinctively search for somewhere safe. Story 32. One of the few things keeping us from better pharmaceutical products is human ethics. Story 33. Though unlikely, it is entirely possible that the universe has already collapsed, and the end of reality as we know it is propagating towards us at the speed of light. We'll never get any warning that it's coming, and it could hit us at any time, annihilating the entire planet in less than a tenth of a second. I find this comforting. Story 34. All whales eventually lose the energy to surface for oxygen, so they basically just sink and drown. These are known as whale falls. A whale will fall down to the ocean depths, its carcass creating a transitional ecosystem for the critters below. It's a rich ecosystem. New species of marine life have been discovered by observing these whale falls. It's a great example of the circle of life. Story 35. Multiple genetic diseases, and this is extremely oversimplified so I don't give people nightmares. Glass bones or brittle bone disease. Sneezing can break a bone, or bumping a counter. Basically, the body can't grow strong bones at all. CPS has been called on many a parent for this disease before diagnosis. Harlequin syndrome, very cracked and broken skin due to what doctors believe is the body being unable to shed old skin easily. Stoneman syndrome. Body overreacts to injury and instead of a bruise or sore muscle, will turn the injured area into bone. After a certain point, people with this have to decide what position to be frozen in for the rest of their existence. Tree man syndrome. condition where the HPV to grow uncontrollably to the point that the skin starts looking like tree bark. Butterfly skin. You know how delicate a butterfly's wings are and how easily they can lose their wing scales? That's the skin of someone who has this. It just comes off with the slightest touch, leaving many patients to look like walking mummies and needing to be under insane amounts of sun protection. Vampire disease. Basically, if someone goes out in sunlight without enough protection, their skin reacts horribly, worse than a sunburn by at least 20 times. And to people who might wonder how the heck I came up with this list, well, when you do research for your own medical problems, are fascinated by ER stories, and are still wondering why some of the human body glitches exist, you come across a lot. Definitely gives you a hard slap to the face and more sympathy, especially if you meet people like these in the wild. Makes it easier to look at them as people, instead of what the f the genetic lottery decided to do. Story 36. The guy that started the vaccines cause autism scare in the late 90s condoned and conducted child abuse as part of his fraudulent study, all in the pursuit of fabricating evidence to support his own business ventures in a class action lawsuit against MMR vaccine manufacturers. As many have pointed out, H-Bomber Guy's recent video is outstanding. My daughter is autistic, and my soon-to-be ex-in-laws have been incredibly anti-vaccine ever since her diagnosis. They wave Wakefield's paper around like gospel, but I know they haven't read it because they told me it was dozens if not hundreds of pages of research, when it's only 5 or 6 pages in total. It's infuriating. H-Bomber Guy's video is a good way to break down every single point that the anti-vaccine crowd likes to use. Story 37. In explosions, it's not always flying shrapnel. It's not the fire that kills you. No, it's the pressure wave that liquefies your insides. Told to me by a buddy who was a US Army sniper. When shot by a 5.56mm round from a rifle, the bullet tumbles entering the body. The entry wound would be but a small hole, but the internal damage is near catastrophic. There are 3 phases to an explosion, generally speaking, that can kill you. First is, as you explained it, the worst for mortality. It will pulp you, and you die rather quickly. That's the blast wave. Second is shrapnel. Pretty easy. Things get thrown at you fast enough to penetrate and end you. This hits second as the blast will outpace the material it throws. Yeah, physics. This can be metal from a grenade, rocks from the ground, whatever. Third is impact. If you get picked up, you will eventually stop. This is the most survivable but still hurts like a witch. I had another patient that survived being bounced not once but twice. Broke a number of bones and hearing loss. These 3 phases are used as guidelines, at least when and how I was taught to determine possible wounds and priority of treatment. I've been out for a while now, so someone may know better or training may have advanced since I was in. Story 38. The one that still disturbs me is that the sun could randomly eject something that could kill us all. Coronal mass ejections, I don't think it can kill all life on Earth without a moment's notice, but I know for sure that a large one, they have sizes, would be more than enough to destroy most of the world's power grid and show the aurora borealis worldwide. You can look into the sky and watch the pretty lights of society collapse around you. Story 39. That the Chernobyl disaster, everything that happened and all of the devastation, was the result of only 5% of the nuclear material in the reactor being explosively ejected. Just 5%. The remaining 95%, 182 tons of the nuclear material, still sits in the ruins of Reactor 4. A volatile mixture of melted fuel, damaged concrete, graphite rods, zirconium cladding, sand, dust, and twisted metal. The entire ruin is emitting lethal amounts of radiation, making cleaning it up next to impossible. Up until the new safe confinement went up in 2017, the only thing that could be done was to seal the open-air reactor off with a hastily constructed shield of metal. This structure lasted for over 30 years, and as it aged, the risk of it collapsing due to decay was very real. If it had crumbled as it almost did in 2013, the result would have been an apocalyptic release of radioactive dust across a far larger area of Europe than the incident in 1986. Story 40. If you fall from a high enough point and hit water, your insides are liquefied on impact. When my dad was in the Navy, someone jumped from a bridge near the base his ship was about to leave. Since his ship had the only available rescue divers on it, they got sent out to check to see if they were military. My dad asked the divers what it was like, and they said it was like trying to get a bag of jello out of the water. This happened at Coronado Naval Base. Turns out your insides don't liquefy. Everything just ruptures and it feels like it. My bad. Story 41. After the bombing of Hiroshima, quote-unquote black rain that contained radioactive material fell, and many didn't realize it until it was too late. Also, they called it Pika-don-Urk, lightning, thunder. For everyone who immediately thought of Pikachu, you aren't far off the mark. It's an onomatopoeia. The Pika is the shining or flash of the lightning, and Don is the boom. Pikachu is shining plus the sound a mouse makes, kind of like calling an animal a flash squeak, which could be a Skaven name. Story 42. There will be a last person, a last living organism, to see the end of all life in the universe. The rest of time will never be experienced and will just happen. Too dark for me. Story 43. People's conscious decisions are usually nothing of the sort. They're usually made subconsciously. Then, all the conscious mind normally does is build narratives about the previously made decisions. Those narratives consciously seem to arise concurrently with the decisions, but really they arise only afterward. Research on split-brain patients have proven all of this. Simply put, your brain makes choices without you knowing, then tricks you into thinking the choices were yours, by allowing you to invent gratifying reasons why you supposedly chose them. I think, therefore I think I am. Story 44. The stimulant effect of coffee at a given regularly consumed dose only lasts a few weeks. After that, your body becomes addicted to coffee, and most of the boost you get is actually the relief of withdrawal symptoms from the caffeine. I'm not saying that there are no benefits to caffeine consumption to long-term health. I'm also just a random layperson on the internet. I learned this as a fact and see some support for it in the literature, but as looking more deeply into it in response to questions below has shown, it's clear that it's a pretty complex question, and many studies do find net benefits to caffeine use, even if the withdrawal model persists in the literature. If you plan to make any major life decisions based on this factoid, please investigate further or ask someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Story 45. Climate change. It's a bit hard to grasp without context, and context is key because no one can understand, respect, or appreciate anything without context. The Earth is about 4.6 billion years old. Arguing about climate change is difficult since 4.6 billion seems like a very long time, and we humans have been alive for such a short time. Why do I care? I won't be alive to deal with it. So let's add context and say that the planet is 46 years old. That means that humans have been around for about 4 hours. 4 hours ago, I was making dinner. 1 minute ago, the Industrial Revolution began, the mid to late 1800s, and I began typing this. In that time, we have destroyed, removed, burned, chopped down over 50% of the world's forests. This is not sustainable for anyone's generation. To understand problems, you must have context. Story 46. I don't know how much of this is unsettling, but just the fact that all the things around me at this moment have been made by other people. The stitches in my shirt were made by another person. There's sentimentality in handmade things, when you know who made it. But mass production makes that less common. I don't know if the person who made my drinks can was happy when they put it through the machine. Maybe one worker at one part of the assembly line for one part of my pair of pants felt just a moment of a craftsman's joy while they were working on mine. People I don't know are holding up my life, making it more tolerable, and I can't know if they were happy when they did it. They probably didn't, since it was just their boring job, but I hope that some of my clothes have some happy stitches in them somewhere. Story 47. There was a medical manufacturing lab in the UK that kept having reports of headaches and weird visions. People would see something at the edge of their vision, but couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't just one person either. It was causing some serious panic. When they entered a room, they felt a presence, like someone else was in the room with them, and something would appear at the corner of their eye, then disappear when they tried to look. Turns out it was caused by a newly installed fan that was vibrating, causing a sound that was too low frequency for humans to hear. Hilariously, the guy who discovered it found it using a fencing sword. He had brought it to work and put it in a vise to polish it, but then the sword started vibrating. Me, I would have noped out of there, considering the room was haunted. Now a sword is moving. But he was apparently much braver. The frequency is known as the fear or ghost frequency. It's around 19 Hz. Mileage may vary. For some people, it causes just mild discomfort. Others, it causes total panic. And still others, it does nothing. For me, it caused my eyes to feel weird. And after a good minute or so, I noticed weirdness at the edge of my vision. It was definitely creeped out. I shut it off then. Definitely an unnerving experience. It's not entirely known why it triggers such a response. The optical illusions and eye discomfort are likely due to the frequency resonating with your eyeballs, causing them to vibrate. But the actual fear response is unknown. Some theories are that our bodies are able to detect low frequencies, such as that of earthquakes or predator roars, but we just can't hear it. A bit like how deaf people can still feel certain sounds, so we become alert and nervous around these infrasounds, since they usually indicate danger. This, combined with the optical illusions, lead to some pretty uncomfortable experiences. Oh, and don't worry. Vibrate your eyeballs sounds way worse than it is. It's like super tiny vibrations, and your eyeballs are nice and squishy. It's not harmful in the slightest, at least not mentally. Certainly feels like you're doing some eldritch ritual stuff though. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this next video. The YouTube algorithm really thinks you like it.